everybody. It's me, God's Comic Brad Stine. This is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Today, tonight, this afternoon, whether you're in Australia or China or perhaps in Antarctica, we have a very, very special guest, Wilfred Reilly, with his brand new book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Taught Me. This guy has some very interesting books out that I've read that I find fascinating about just the progressive perspective. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that I wasn't going to. Wyatt?
Well, 5 seconds in, and you've already butchered the intro.
No, I didn't.
That's a record. That's got to be a record.
No, the intro was perfect. But then when I tried to say progressive perspective, I said progressive.
Yeah, exactly. That was in the intro.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the intro.
It was less than a minute into a starting.
I did mention Wilfred, though. I did mention his book.
Okay, cool, great. You got most of it correct. Unfortunately, you were aiming for all of it.
Well, Wyatt, guess where I am right now?
Behind a trail?
No, guess where I am right now?
At the house?
Wyatt, guess where I am right now? And it rhymes with Boise, Idaho. Wait.
Boise, Idaho?
Yeah, how'd you nail it?
Well, you've always been terrible at rhyming.
I have been. Every time I try to rhyme, I find it takes too much emphasis. Wait, never mind. Anyways, the whole point is this, son. I am in Idaho as we speak. Now, I know what you're thinking
Then
yourself.
who am I talking to?
That's what I was going to get at. You're probably saying to yourself, how did you pull this off, Dad? Do you ever call me Dad or do you call me Papa?
Wait, what? I'm sorry. That one just got me off guard.
Okay.
No, I don't think in the history of forever I have ever called you Papa.
Hey, listen, did you know that papas is Spanish for potatoes?
Yeah, well, isn't it like the accent sign over the of one of the letters? Changes it from father to potato.
Which makes sense because potatoes need a little accent of salt to make them tasty. So in
What
a
does
way,
that have to do with?
so the
that's a stretch.
papa's accent is
That's
like,
a stretch.
is it?
Yeah,
Is it?
It's the kind of stretch that turns potatoes into French fries.
Maybe it was a mashup.
We're not doing this now. Not in front of the audience.
Okay, all right, I was just trying to find the gravy. Listen, I got to tell you
What
something.
does that even have to do with potatoes?
I'm thinking they go with mashed potatoes.
Okay, but like, if you,
Yeah.
just
Folks,
just continue.
If you are brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, and if you are brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, it's because you've been in a coma, because this is a blockbuster podcast that even I listen to after I do it because it's so amazing. I listen to it, I hear, did I really say that? Did I really think that? Did I really utter those words out loud?
That's right, folks. This man has about the memory span of a potato.
Well, but
he forgets what he says the moment he says it.
but the accent is on content because the things, the guests that we have on, Wyatt, for our little modest little podcast, they are amazing guests, and shockingly, they will agree to come on with us. But we got some other great ones coming up here in the next few weeks that I can't tell you about now because I want to keep you in suspense so that you will show up live. And Wyatt, have you ever noticed that more people watch the podcast? Now, there are a lot of people listen on Spotify. A lot of people listen on Life Audio on Salem. A lot of people listen on the Apple Tunes and on YouTube. They listen. But they don't watch it as much live as they do later. Now, does that have something to do with your incompetence? Or do you think it has to do with the fact that they just want to spend time drenching in the wisdom and so they just want to take their time?
Well, if you want the serious answer, it's because if you have a live show at a specific time every day, you're only going to get the audience who's available at that time and who knows you exist.
Why don't they make themselves available at that time?
Because it's Brad Stine Has Issues. I hate to say it, man, but
that hurt, Wyatt.
It hurt because it's true. If it wasn't, you would be fine.
Listen, who of all the guests that we've ever had? Give me your top 3 favorite guests that we've had, and we've had at this point. By the way, do you hear a lawnmower?
I was hoping you would just like ignore that and we could pretend it didn't happen, so the audience doesn't call us out.
So just in case you people hear something in the background, that is my private helicopter. I have a helipad on top of my house, and it whisks me away to meetings, to help people who are in need, especially people who need a helicopter. Off I go to rush them off to some kind of business meeting or whatnot. This is pre-Zoom, by the way. Nowadays we have Zoom, but prior to Zoom, people had to be whisked away in a helicopter to meet with folks because they were too lazy to drive there.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't everybody remember that time where helicopters would just roam the skies, taking people to wherever they needed to be, before the invention of the horse and buggy?
No, why? Listen, I know what you're thinking. You're saying to myself, you're being a little bit over the top. Obviously, people did. Now, listen, private helicopters, especially in Manhattan, are very crucial because it's hard to get around in there. I don't know if you've ever driven in.
You mean Manhattan Island?
Yeah.
Would be kind of hard to get to without a helicopter? No, really? Tell me more. I'm surprised.
No. Get around within the city of New York.
Dude, honestly, a catapult launching you to your destination would be a more efficient means of travel than trying to drive there.
Hey, listen, how would you know?
Experience.
So you've actually driven a car in New York City?
Let me put it to you this way. Simply being a passenger in a car being driven through there was some of the worst anxiety I've had in a car ever.
Yes, folks, if you don't know...
Much less driving it.
If you're brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, that voice that you're hearing on the other side of the camera is Wyatt Leroy Stine. Now, he is my son. He exuded from my loins. I created him from whole cloth. He did not exist, and then poof, he did, thanks to me. So his little snarky comments only exist because I, procreated him. Now, God gave me the means to do that. So I give all props to God and the burden that he's given me by having my son, who's clearly annoying, but in a fun way, right? In a clever, funny way. He emphasizes things like...
I'm not annoying. I am the button presser who is the only one responsible for this podcast not crashing and burning.
Well, listen.
Let's not forget that.
I spent a lot of money based on my donors' goodwill to buy you buttons so you could add some flash, bang, scramble, smoke and mirrors. And I noticed you never use them.
Well... there's never an appropriate time, and I keep forgetting the note that I left that tells me what the buttons do. So I don't want to press one at random and have it be wrong.
So anyway, folks, as you can see in real time, he admits that he doesn't follow through with his expectations. His job is to push funny buttons. I like to call them the funny buttons.
You've never called them that.
I did this moment ago.
Okay, you've called them that once in the entirety of us having it.
Well, let me ask you a question about the funny buttons. Do you ever find yourself longing to push the funny buttons and the moment escapes you and it's too late?
Sometimes, yeah. It is kind of annoying.
Like, what's your favorite funny button, if you had to pick?
Oh, let's hope I get it in the first try. Okay, I have no idea what button that was. I didn't
hear it.
I didn't hear it either. Hold on, let me try it again with the volume up this time.
Good idea.
So yeah, I mean, listening to it now, it's
as you can see, my son, who loves to parody me and mock and ridicule me in a fun way. It's sarcasm. That's what comedy is. But clearly,
I never said it was any better.
He is a button pusher, and when he pushed them, you can't hear him. Now, I have no access to the buttons. I don't know how to make the buttons work. I don't know how to make them make their sound. I don't know how to bring up the volume. Only my son does. And yet he failed in that simple...
Oh, wait, I raised the wrong volume now. Give me a second.
Why would you say that? It makes you look even more...
Well, to be fair, I'm not the one who turned every single dial down one day mysteriously. I don't know who did it, but somebody did and messed all the audio settings.
So what funny button would go with that comment?
That one.
It does go with it, but unfortunately I heard that first.
Well, yeah, that was leading up to the wah, wah, wah. It gives it more impact.
But look at how great the funny buttons are, and you could have used them all these years, and you just chose not to.
I've used them before,
but rarely anymore.
Well, yeah, honestly, we have to do the thing that we said we'd do years ago. Make our own custom things that play when you press the buttons. Because you can do that.
How do you do that?
You gotta record something, plug it into the thing, and then program a button to do it.
So the funny button box gives us the capability to make up our own funny noises?
It does.
Well, we're going to have to work on that.
We are going to have to do that.
All right. Well, I'm grateful to know that's happening. And I know if I count on you, this is something that'll get done in a couple 10. It won't ever.
No.
But listen, I want to ask you this. Son, of all the guests that we've had, and if you look over at the board of former guests, and I think they're all still with us. I hope no one's passed on. And if they have, we'll give them a tribute. But who would be your top 3 favorite guests that we've had on since we started this couple years ago, this magnificent podcast deal?
Okay. It would be the hockey player.
Oh, Mike Fisher.
The basketball player, I think we had.
Oh, John Stockton, NBA Hall of Famer.
And the guy who played with, was it Prince he played with?
Oh, Des Dickerson, the original lead guitar player for Prince.
Yes.
What do you like about him?
It's just so fascinating to hear like a first-hand account of someone that up until now you've only ever really listened to singing songs, but never actually met the person themselves.
Yeah, and to think they were at the beginning of that when Prince wasn't even famous yet. Are you familiar with Prince's work? Like, do you have any?
Oh my goodness! I know exactly one song by him, and it annoys me to no end.
Why?
Because it's a song where he sounds so whiny.
What is it?
Kiss.
Oh.
It's like I had to learn it for a band camp thing. I can't listen to it. Like I literally have to like skip it when I'm randomly shuffling through my music.
Was the drum part hard?
No, it's just him singing. He is so whiny and high pitched. I just can't stand it.
Oh, it was a cappella. Not a cappella. What do you call it?
No,
what's that?
It literally
falsetto.
It literally sounds like he has stubbed his toe and is trying for the entire song to avoid crying over it.
Falsetto.
Sure.
Yeah, he's doing falsetto. So I know what you're talking about with Kiss. Well, anyways, that's an interesting batch of 3 guests, and I think that they're great candidates. I mean, who would have thought when we started our little podcast that we would have an NBA Hall of Fame, one of the greatest point guards who was on the original Dream Team in history, John Stockton. Who would have thought that we would have the former captain of the Nashville Predators hockey team, Mike Fisher, who also married Carrie Underwood. So she, from what I understand, has made a bit of a mark in the music industry. So that's an interesting thing. And then, of course, Des Dickerson, who was the original lead guitarist. Before Prince became the lead guitarist in his own band, it was this guy. So great combination of picks. I believe that they weren't actually your 3 favorites. I think you just pulled them out of the air because you panicked.
No, like literally, I remember like the ones who were like did famous, important, impressive things had the best stories about said impressive things.
You know, one person that I remember you had a little bit of a fanboy to was Lee Allen Kaufman.
Who?
Okay, there was a show that we used to watch when you were youngins, you and Mace, and it was
mean Lee Allen Baker?
Yes. Leon Bacon Kaufman.
But
here's the thing. She was shooting to be my favorite four-name lady, but she failed. But anyway, she was one of the leads in a Disney sitcom called Good Luck Charlie, and you used to watch that, and it was very funny. It was very well done. They were great actors, and suddenly she was here live, and you were a little starstruck. Let's just be honest.
The whole family was like, "Oh, I remember that show."
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah.
So that was the other. Was there somebody else that you were starstruck by?
I can't think of any. Then
Mm.
again, we have like 80 something
Yeah, I
guests,
know. I
and
know.
I remember a collective
Mm.
like 5 of them.
Mm. Well, listen. Speaking of a collective five, many of you who are watching this show for the first time, you're doing it, and it's why everybody gets on anybody's podcast because either they have a very well-known, established podcast that just people love to listen to the banter, the dialogue, the interview, or they're familiar with the person. And in my case, as a comic, many people have seen my comedy routines, and so they suddenly see that, oh, look, he's doing his own podcast. Let's go see what he's like when he's not hysterical. And so here I am, being non-hysterical. But I noticed that of all the clips that have gone out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, what is it, Twitter or X, whatever they call it, Rumble, Truth, all of those guys out there. There's been a handful that have really blown up, and one of them I think um, blew up because it was prescient. Wyatt, I know you don't know what that word means, so I'm going to make sure that everybody knows you don't know. And no, don't quickly try to look it up. What's prescient mean?
It means
Keep trying. Google.
currently relevant.
No.
It
no.
means
Keep googling. Quick. Keep googling, but pretend like you're thinking.
Precedent.
Prescient.
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 Okay. Having or showing knowledge of events before they take place. So basically psychic. Or clairvoyant, I guess.
So one of the things I have noticed, my son, and if you guys haven't figured out by now, Wyatt is my son, and no, he's not on camera. And yes, he's going to be. We are going to probably put him on camera because as time goes on and I do more live events and this and that, Wyatt will probably go with me. We might do some events and film. Stine has issues at live places. So, Wyatt's going to have to be seen unless we dress him head to foot in a green screen like costume. What are those things? Those body suits?
Morph suit, I think.
Maybe
something like that, like the pure
yeah,
color.
Yeah.
Those things were so weird. How did those ever catch on?
I think it was for people that didn't know how to sew on buttons,
or people who had a costume, but then the zipper broke, so they sort of trapped in there.
Yeah, and they didn't want to say help me," because it felt foolish and stupid.
I mean, yeah. It definitely, you definitely right in that one. It did look stupid.
It did, but anyways, they made billions of dollars off of using those suits for green screen. What do you call it? Computer generated CGI.
CGI, yeah.
But like a lot of these famous, like Lord of the Rings, right? The Gollum guy or whatever. He was dressed in that kind of a suit the whole time, and then they just turn him into this creature. But anyways, Wyatt is going to hopefully be seen soon. We were thinking about the 100th episode. Wyatt is revealed, and then from then on, we'll simply have a camera on him so he can interact, and you actually see my son. But he's my son, and he doesn't look like me at all. Why do you think you look at me like me at all?
No.
I mean, anything.
I don't.
Anything about us looks the same.
Not a single solitary molecule of me looks anything like you.
Well, how about our height?
I guess our height's kinda similar.
No, not at all. I'm 5'6". How tall are you?
5'9"
So why would you say they were similar when they're clearly
Well,
3.5 inches not?
I don't know what the threshold is between heights where it's considered the same.
Or similar.
Yeah.
Or equivalent. Or
what's
close.
the threshold there?
I'd say half an inch.
Half an inch is barely nothing.
Right.
Barely anything.
That's what I mean. You're close. You're close. If I was 5'6" and you were 5'6" and a half, that'd be close. But not 5'9" and an eighth. Ridiculous. Anyways, there's one of my old prescient show, and that's the thing about my comedy, I guess. When I came out of the closet years ago and said, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, this is what I believe, this is how I see the world, I'm not ashamed, I'm not going to water it down. I'm not going to make it palatable for you. I'm going to speak the truth of it because it's true. And it's going to make some of you deeply offended because you're going to be offended by Jesus. And you should be, because Jesus is God and he's going to be your judge in the end. So if you don't want him to be your judge, or you don't want to have a judge, or you believe that you should get to be your own judge, then you got to hate Jesus, which means you'll hate me because I'm a follower of Jesus. But that being said, many of the things that I've said came from that perspective, clearly, from that cultural perspective. And a handful of them were things that I saw. I knew a long time ago that political correctness was going to destroy freedom in America because it was Marxism. And Marxism demands totalitarianism, which means it controls the words, it controls your ability to think, to believe, to behave, to worship however you want. The state must rule, you must worship the state. So I knew that this was not going well. And as a comic who needs free speech, completely accessible, this was not going to bode well for me, my profession. And of course, we've had lots of comics lately that have said that political correctness, or wokeism as it's now become political correctness on steroids, if we want to use an old worn metaphor, has tried to censor comedians who are the ones that make fun of the king, mock the cultural conventions, and whoever has the most power in culture should be mocked. And they love that. The left always said conservatives aren't funny because comedy's only funny if it punches up, and you guys punch down. Well, guess what? All of the people you said were down, all the marginalized voices, are now clearly at the apex top of everything. They get all the special treatment. They cannot be criticized. They cannot be joked about. They cannot be looked at with any kind of disdain. All the people that are the marginalized people that aren't white, people that have any kind of sexual desires, whatever those might be, people that aren't comfortable in their own skin, they are the most privileged people on earth now, which means they are as high up as it gets, which means I gotta punch them. It's their turn. But because progressives don't just anoint people at certain status levels, but also protect them, and in the illusion of saying they believe in free speech, they make sure that your speech is absolutely squashed if it doesn't fit with theirs. I call out that hypocrisy. And my brand new album that will be coming out soon, Laugh While It's Legal, talks about that. So I talked about something years ago. I think the album was called Tolerate This, done by Warner Brothers. And so it was like 2005, I think. So almost 25 years ago, I was talking about the idea of boys and girls are different. And this thing has been repurposed out into the atmosphere, and it's killing it. And other versions of me doing it in other areas, it just gets shared and blown up because I was speaking of this 25 years ago, thus making this joke prescient, because if people were to see it now, they think I'm talking about now. I was warning you all about this 25 years ago. And if you think I'm kidding, I'll prove it to you. Wyatt, if you would, find a funny button and push it.
We're the ones that should be telling our kids the differences, because I know that men and women are different physically because I had a big sister. And one Christmas came and she got a girl's bike and I got a boy's bike. Do they still do it like that? I don't know. But let me tell you what it used to be like. A girl's bike was a bike just like mine, except it had a big slot right through the middle so she could just pop right on. Boy's bike, on the other hand, had an iron bar that started right from under your seat, went directly here, and was welded right there. And the first time you took it out there and your feet slipped off the pedals, you knew you were a boy. That's the difference. And my sister thought it was funny. That is what is so bizarre about the way that boys and girls are raised. The way they're raised. Because my sister actually used to kick me there, right in the groin here. Because we've got church people here. Yeah, I don't know what you call it. Loins. Okay, loins. That's in the Bible. Now what are you going to do? apologize for... My sister kicked me in the loins. And you know what's weird? My mother taught her that. What kind of a freak was my mother, actually? Because what did they teach the boys? Never hit a girl, never hit a girl, never hit a girl. To the girl, if a boy bothers you, kick him where it counts. I was raised in a Christian home. That's what we call it. Kick 'em where it counts. Like they kept score. 2 points. And it hurt. And the girls laugh every single time a guy gets kicked in the loins. That's a big funny joke. Oh, my sister was so smug about it, too. So smug, not understanding anything about the physiology of a boy. Oh, it can't hurt so bad. Just like feels like when we get hit in the chest. Yeah, it's just like when a girl gets hit in the chest. Yep, just like when we get hit in the chest. No. No, it's not like getting hit in a gland at all. It's an organ. You want to feel it, ladies? It's easy. Take your eyes, pull them out, hang them here, do this. There you go. It hurt! And I didn't understand it. And yet my religion teaches me that God said, let's reason together. You can ask me things. You can talk to me about things. And some things that you're not going to understand, I've done for a reason, for a purpose. And finally, it made sense to me. Finally, it all came clear to me that he made us differently that way to prove that the way that he created us was exactly like he said in the Bible. Because think about it. God's not stupid. He knows what he's doing. Every other organ in a boy's body, his heart, his liver, his spleen, protected by his rib cage. What went wrong? Nothing went wrong. The one stinking rib he took to make you was the one protecting my loins. That's what went wrong.
What? How could somebody see that clearly that early in life? Why? Because if you are aware of what is happening in your culture as you're supposed to be as a Christ follower, then you apply your faith to the actual world. Why? Because the Bible is the revelation of reality. Wyatt, have you ever heard of the Bible?
In passing.
Yeah. And what is your favorite scripture in the Bible?
John 3:16.
How does it go?
For God so loved the earth, he gave his one and only Son. And then some extra.
That
parts.
whosoever believes.
Yeah, that's he whosoever believe
shall not
perish, but shall find.
You know what, Wyatt? I gotta say something. I know that you were thrown a curve. You weren't expecting to recite John 3:16, the most famous.
This was not what we talked about behind the scenes during that
For
video.
God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. But yeah, I don't know. Why memorize the one scripture that tells you how you don't go to hell? Why make that a priority in your life, son? Nevertheless, I wanted to... He panics, folks. He probably knows...
I just straight up wasn't thinking that.
He probably knows many Bible passages, but when he doesn't know what's coming, he just completely panics. I was trying to make my new thing go
yes, make your new mic walk better by smacking the filter and making a weird noise appear for it.
Well, anyways, it just shows that this is organic, this is real. I don't know if you know this or not, but this is basically a hybrid of a cup with a string that goes over to Wyatt. So that's how this works. I'm just letting you know we do everything as organic.
Way to peel back the curtain, show people how this shindig, is that a word?
Wyatt, it is. And you know,
how that works.
I gotta say, why? Because I am a humble man, and I think because I am so humble, I'm fascinated by how people see me and respect me and love me and honor me. And most of the time, it's because of my humbleness. And so I deal with it. I deal with it on a daily basis. It's hard.
I mean, you're so humble. You have me tell you every day just how humble you are.
I want you.
And people don't do that unless they really mean it.
I want you to remind me because I forget. Because I'm so humble, I forget how humble I am.
You are so humble. Like honestly, you're the most humble person out of everyone who pays me to call you humble.
Oh, I agree 100, or shall I say 100%. Listen.
Classic Brad. Classic humble Brad.
I'll bet you there'd be a funny button to go along with that. Stop it, everybody. Sorry about my humbleness. Listen, I want to ask you guys a question. Earlier today, I made a reference this podcast that I was in Boise, Idaho. It's Monday night, right? And it's September the 16th. And I told you that we have a wonderful Wilfred Reilly on as a guest. You're going to love this guy. You're going to want to get his books. They're important. They're incredibly crucial. He's a teacher, university professor, but I am in Boise, so this is what we call a pre-record, which means I'm here in spirit and I'm here in digital form, but I'm really right now in Boise, Idaho. And if you are there in the Boise area and on the 17th, you can come see me live because I'm there as we speak. But that's just a little Hollywood magic that you guys aren't used to, but we're doing it for you to make you a show. In the past, I kind of didn't mention it because I was afraid that people would feel abandoned. But now I realize you guys aren't stupid like me. You knew I wasn't here all along, so what the heck? I mean, it's why I can't even go on and look at my fans because I don't get to see this because you ain't there. I mean, I know that Ashley Haas is number one. She always is. I know that St. Nick is there. He's just some guy. I know that Karen Boyd showed up. She's been so kind and strong in helping and putting this together. Stan Stenson, I hope, has shown up. Gianna Sizemore, of course. Paula Faye Marie Rauchi, my favorite four-named lady, is out there. I know that the Bushquacker may not be, hasn't been the last few weeks, so I don't know if he's bailed on us, got angry. Maybe I made him so angry by calling his Quackenbush last name a Bushquacker. I thought it was clever, but maybe it hit him the wrong way. Maybe he's dyslexic, or maybe he just has better things to do, and you know what? Can't blame him. But I did want to kind of tell you guys this. As we go forward in Brad Stine Has Issues, and we are moving forward. For all of those who watch the show and listen to the show, we are getting sponsors, believe it or not, who are now kind of curious about jumping into the Brad Stine Has Issues game. When they call, they say, "Can I speak to Wyatt, please?" But nevertheless, here we sit wondering if we are in fact going to grow just like we had hoped. But we didn't get there by accident. We got there, because I wanted to speak from my heart. And then I asked you guys who watched, do you think this is helpful? Do you think this matters? And you said it did. And then I said, hey, can you help me build out the studio? And you did, and you donated. And so my ministry kind of has grown. And I said to you, I promise you, if you hang on, we're going to try to grow it. And we're going to try to make it as effective and as influential and as inspirational as it can be. And that's why it's called comedy. I always want you to have some fun because most Christian podcasts aren't funny. Conservatism, again, not republicanism, conservatism, conservative values, those things that are conserving wisdom, conserving history, conserving the founding fathers, the original intent of the Constitution, conserving our heritage, conserving traditions, conserving the ability to see bad things that we've done, try to correct them, and then try to move forward, and also conserving our ability to be wise enough to look at history as a whole, see which political philosophies and religious concepts actually worked, actually seemed to comport to reality, and which didn't, jettison which doesn't, and jump in on which does it, which is why, as a Christian, we know that nothing, and I mean no religion, no political philosophy, no ideology, no concept in human history, has given more freedom, no more egalitarianism, more income, wealth, food, and comfort as the Judeo-Christian ethic that started the West. Nothing has come close, and nothing ever will. The fact that we now have people who want to destroy that and eliminate that and include and instead take the demonic, satanic cancer of atheism, the undergirding of all communism, to destroy everything it touches, and atheism does because it's the original religious cult, the first cult to look at God Almighty in the face and say, "I'll worship myself, thank you very much." And it's what all atheists do. All the internet atheists are driven by arrogance and anger, at least arrogance. I see the same ideas that all the rest of you see throughout all human history. When humans were the most simple, had the least amount of understanding of how the natural world works, all the way to 2024 as we record, and how incredibly advanced we've become. People still, to this day, throughout every segment of the world, believe in God or gods and have never stopped and never will. So those of us who've seen this evidence said, you know what, God's hard to understand. There's much I do not get. There's things that bother me, give me anxiety, make me frustrated. I don't get that. But when we put all the data together and the evidence together, the only thing that makes sense, even if you don't see him, is God. He does seem to be the conclusion to what allows us to think, reason, use inductive, deductive reasoning, allows us to have teleology, that allows us to have morals. Every time you add God, it makes sense. Atheism has none of that. As a matter of fact, atheists cannot survive one day of their life and communicate with each other without borrowing from the Judeo-Christian ethic to try to function in society. So it's why I believe this. I believe pragmatically and through my reason, it brought me to the precipice of faith, and that's when you jump into that magical, mystical place called transcendence. And that's what I believe. That's what I stand for. That's what I will fight for. They will kill me or imprison me historically for believing those things because the enemy wants to control the world, and they want to do that through despots, people who choose to say they're better than the rest of us, smarter than all atheists say they're smarter than everybody else. They're the only ones that saw the evidence and denied it and said, that makes me better. No, it makes you a fool. But the Bible says that. When you reject God, you cannot be wise. Are atheists stupid? No. Very, very. Not internet atheists. They're just people that like to hurt and harm other people's beliefs. They just cut and paste other people's atheistic ideas and throw them out there because they can't think for themselves. I ignore them. I brush the dust off my feet. But the good ones, the Alex O'Connors and folks like Bertrand Russells and folks like that are good at it, they aren't wise. The Bible says that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. They're very smart and they have a lot of data and a lot of ideas. But wisdom allows you to take all that data and say there must be something beyond that, and it's in the transcendent. They've rejected that. Why? They're not wise. So they can't. They can't see what is obvious to them every time they think it through. God must be out there even though he's hard to understand. And he should be. He's God. Should be a little bit more difficult for us to grasp. Nevertheless, part of what that means is this. Do you care about your eternal life and salvation? If you do, you need to accept Christ as your Savior. He died and rose again. This is all historically verified so that you don't have to go to hell. If you go to hell, keep this in mind. You have chosen it. You don't have to. Right now, you can say, okay, Jesus, I believe you. You're my sacrifice. I accept you, and then try to learn about him. That's it. God said, you're in. You're in. So do that. Jump in that. Join the Mighty 10,000. This is a $3 a month donation to become a disciple. You know, we were never, ever called to be Christians, ever. We were called to be disciples, a discipline, to truly be all in for Christ, especially in this season in the world. So, folks, jump in, go to bradstine.com, join my Facebook, follow it. Please join the YouTube. Please share it. Please follow it. Please press the subscription button so we can grow this and get more people to see it and hear it and hopefully be inspired by it. But I want you to help me in that regard and to join us, be part of the Mighty 10,000. And if you upgrade to a higher level, you even get your own number that will be given on the Militia of the Mind shirt, and I will sign it, and you'll see it, and we'll send it out to you. But either way, what I really, really wanted to do in my podcast, it's, I guess, a kind of different with a lot of Christian podcasts, not completely, but kind of, is comedy, and then from a professional stand-up comedian, but also hopefully philosophically robust, and bringing on people of all walks of life. So I've had atheists, I've had sideshow performers, I have had musicians, sword swallowers, comedians, actors, professional athletes, musicians, theologians, astrophysicists. I just have an eclectic view of the world. All I care about is truth, and all truth is God's truth. So if the truth is coming from James Lindsay, for example, who's an expert on CRT, who's an atheist, I brought him on because the things he taught about on his expertise are true, because truth comes from God. So that's what this is about. That's what this podcast is about. And in that vein, we have a very special guest, someone who I first saw his book, and you're about to see it because we've already recorded the interview. But he has this new book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Taught Me, and it is lies. Progressivism has to live in lies, because if it told and revealed itself completely to everybody, nobody would buy it. You'd have to be crazy, because it is lunacy. And if you look around at the world and think there's some lunacy happening, thank the progressive. And remember, they were given that right through atheism, which has no morals, has no teleology, has no meaning, has no purpose, has nothing to offer but destruction. And hey, philosophies, ideas have consequences. But thank God there's people out there trying to fight against it, trying to reveal it, trying to magnify it and show you what's going on. So, folks, I think you're going to enjoy this interview. I know I did. And sit back, relax, and take a gander or a listen to my interview with Wilfred Reilly. Enjoy. How do you do, Professor Reilly?
I'm great. Good to be on the show. A little tired after the end of the day, but doing well.
Well, I'll bet it is if you have to lecture students all day long that apparently don't know what gender they are. It's got to be traumatic for you to try to just have basic conversations. I mean, do you find yourself, is there a particular class topic or course that you are teaching specifically that deals with these topics, or are some of these things you've written just sort of on the side that you wanted to sort of explore?
Well, I mean, Kentucky State's a Southern historically Black college, so I mean, our students actually aren't all that woke. I mean, a lot of them are more into graduating and becoming coaches or police officers or something like that than identifying as cats and moving to LA. I mean, it's about a 50-50 mix of Black kids and Appalachian kids. So it's more traditionally what you think of a college as having been. And I will say that's actually true for a lot of colleges. I mean, if you look at many of the HBCUs, obviously pretty pro-Black, but not the crazy upper middle class woke scene. You look at all the military schools, the Citadel, the community colleges. I mean, even the SEC. Like, if you're out on a football weekend with your girl at Florida, you're probably not going to the Free Palestine encampment and throwing Molotovs at the cops. I mean, you're probably at the game. So, I mean, I think a lot of the attention that focuses on academia kind of centers on that 10 or 20% of bespoke upper class schools that no one really goes to, like Bowdoin, Oberlin. And this is actually a problem in general in the country. Like, politicians pay a lot of attention to Twitter. And something I'll say as a consultant is nobody's on Twitter. Like, I'm on Twitter. I talk trash on Twitter. Comedians, writers, we're all on Twitter. We all have fun with each other. See who's the funniest. But I mean, if you're looking for like the most influential housewife in like a Moms for Liberty group who's got 50,000 Facebook followers and a bunch of real friends, like, she's probably not even using that platform. So you see that distinction. But yeah, I'm an actual working professor. So, I mean, I do what's called a 3 and 3. Usually I teach 3 classes a semester. So you're in there for 2 hours a day talking to the kids. And no white collar job is exhausting, but it's pretty tiring. I mean, you have to be somewhat entertaining, but you also have to be able to engage all of these people and talk with them and sort of not get punked by questions about your politics if you're on the left or the right. Does it just bring a sense of despair? No, the kids are pretty if you're at a state U and a pretty good one. I mean, I imagine it would depend where you are. Teaching in prison or something, there's probably some great moments, but there's also some depression. I think what it does remind you is kind of the point of my book, that only like half the story is getting told very often. So you have people come into class that are obviously intelligent, but that have heard of, say, Ibram Kendi, but not Thomas Sowell. And
Yes.
just so on down the line, like every figure that have heard of Karl Marx, but not Milton Friedman, that have heard of Martin Luther King, but not Booker T. Washington, and like every, on and on, just down the line. Adam Smith, but not, anyone who would disagree with him, the road to serfdom and all of that, Hayek. So you do have to correct that if you're on the right.
One of the things that I really try to do on my show is, have real conversations, try to talk about whatever is necessary and not be fearful of being considered insensitive or whatever, woke, whatever. Like I said, trust me, the woke is the last thing you'll get from me. When I saw some interview by you, it just intrigued me because you were, when you were talking about the lies my liberal teacher told me. And again, I've read a lot of material on sort of this deconstruction of history in the West and so forth. And I mentioned Heather McDonald and things along that line. And suddenly I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, this guy, I got to get his book. And it's rare that I will interview somebody that I haven't read the book, because I actually read these books. I find them fascinating and I would love information. I'm an autodidact. It's how I've learned everything in my life. But suddenly I said, no, I've heard this guy before. And I said, let me look. And sure enough, I was like, okay. He wrote Taboo. Okay, that was great. 10 facts you can't talk about. So obviously this is your lane. You care about, and what it appears to be with Taboo, but which is not only wrestling with, are we even allowed to have these hard conversations, which, by the way, shouldn't be called hard conversations if they're true. That should be what's called a conversation, a dialogue, an insight, a desire to seek revelation and truth and reality so we can function as a society and hopefully get better when we do things wrong. And to not be able to speak about these things, it's such a backwards lean towards what you would hope education is supposed to do. Now, you said this, that your college university is predominantly Black or 50% Black. So, let's start there. One guy that I have just been mind boggled by is Thomas Sowell. That guy, he's amazing. I mean, the insights, the wisdom this guy has come up with for years and years and years, and to be literally unknown to the Black community is what is wrong with you guys? You should want to claim this guy. It's like Ben Carson. You should want to claim the neurosurgeon. I'm serious. That's a good thing. This guy's a genius. So talk to me about that. Why would a Black American, why would they have not known Thomas Sowell, that has held court in the philosophy world for whatever, 50 years?
Well, I think part of it is just that the academy in general, if you look at the universities and the elite prep schools, leans about 93-7 to the left. And that's not a misstatement. It's 93, 95 on one side, 7 on the other. So, I mean, like in 2004, Pew, the respected research company, actually surveyed national media journalists. And this isn't quite the academy, but they found basically this figure, like 7% of them were on the right. That includes center right, that includes libertarian. The other 93% then were leftists, they were liberals, or they were left-leaning moderates. And I say left-leaning because there were follow-up questions very specifically dealing with abortion and so on. So that's the climate we're coming out of. I mean, when it comes to the academy specifically, I mean, there are other large-scale analyses. There's one that's on the website Econ Live, which is kind of a data archive. But they asked professors to kind of rate their viewpoints on the same standard political scale. And 18% of them said they were Marxists or communists. I mean, so just to put that in context, 18% of them said they were communists. Now, that's only in the social sciences. That's not biology or anything like that. But in society overall, about half of 1% of people say that they are communists. That's a crazy fringe position to be an actual commie. It's almost a joke. It's like being a fascist. Another 20.6%, I believe, said they were political radicals, like actually ready to go out in the streets, campaign. And another 24% said they were activists. So that all told is 63% before you really get too liberal. And again, you're talking about under 10% were conservatives. So when you're in that kind of milieu where there are more communists than there are Republicans, the people on the right, like Friedman, Sowell, the big hosses, I mean, you mentioned Heather McDonald, you could talk about John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry. Like, nobody really talks about those guys. And it's pretty crazy. I mean, even someone like Rush Limbaugh, who's by no means a social scientist, but has, I think, the 4th best-selling book of all time, who's up there right around the Bible with, the way things ought to be. Those things are just blips in the culture. a lot of individual sort of yeomen, like smart upper middle class people, read the book. Almost everyone's read Knowledge and Decisions or The Way Things Ought to Be that reads books. There's an impact in local op-ed columns and so on, and then it just kind of goes away because it doesn't make it into the mainstream of an academia where everyone is on the left. So a lot of people don't know who Soul is in the first place. I mean, on the right, we're keeping him alive because obviously that's a level of intellect above Limbaugh or even above Mayor McWhorter. But I mean, if you're a non-conservative intellectual, you probably don't know that much about Thomas Sowell. The other thing with Black people specifically is that since the 1960s, there's been this really negative image in the Black community, which is that the way to be authentically Black or the way to get ahead is to be what I think of as down with us, which to means to be as kind of thuggish and goonish as possible. Like the authentic Black guy is the like revolutionary slave or like the kitchen crip gangbanger from Compton. So like I actually grew up in the hood. Like I was an athlete who was also kind of nerdy. I wasn't out there gang banging. But I mean, like I had friends that did. I'm actually East Aurora outside of Chicago is a hood. It's known for its Latin kings. It's known for some of the black gangs. Where I was born originally, East Aurora is a hood. Like I was born in Chicago. I lived in the Bridgeport neighborhood, which is an Italian and Irish at the time, pretty much slum for a while, a lot of blacks as well. You know, I actually came from that environment, and I don't really think there's a whole lot to celebrate about being poor, you know, being on welfare, being cold during the winter, so on. But that's really become a thing in the community where people try to, I guess what I'm saying is people try to exaggerate in black communities, adjacent urban white communities, and now some other minority communities, Hispanics and Cambodians and so on, will try to exaggerate negative aspects of their background in a way that's very counter to what people have traditionally done. For example, women have overemphasized their purity. Immigrant groups have overemphasized their Americanness, so on. In terms of the fake hood thing, like Tupac went to Juilliard. Like he briefly went to Juilliard, then he went to the Baltimore School of the Performing Arts. He was a ballerina. Tough guy. He could probably kick my ass. But I mean, he was a performing dancer, and he was one of the best 200 or so in the country. His mom, Asada Shakur, was a revolutionary, but she was also a writer. I think she wrote cookbooks. Like she ended up fleeing to Cuba the one time she was involved in a legal case. I think she's still down there. So the idea that a lot of the people that are in the hip hop scene or that are in the urban art scene are in fact gangsters is totally fake. It's just something that's put on. Like David Banner, I don't think he pretends to be a gangster, but he has a master's degree in social work. That brother came and talked here once and gave advice on investing. So, I mean, I think you see that creep into the black community in general. So like white kids will generally dress up. Like if you see a white working class kid and he's going to prom or something, he'll spring for a suit, maybe even his girlfriend's dress, or at least put on a polo. In the black community, you'll often see the reverse, where like dentist sons will try to look like goons with like hoodies and ski masks on. And it gets pretty silly. Like KSU is a top 120 college. So we don't take it seriously, but you understand, okay, this is a trend that at its root is negative. Why is my dentist walking around trying to look like a thug? It's something you have to talk to young men about. And I think that also contributes to the rejection of these very establishment figures like Soul to some extent. I mean, Tom Sowell's a guy wearing a three-piece Brooks Brothers suit. He's a conservative. He's got the herringbones on. I think until a certain point in life, it would be hard for a lot of black kids to take him seriously.
One of the challenges, I think, and especially Soul, was one of the ones that really kind of opened my eyes because he was data driven. He was an economist. So he was really about, I'm not going to tell you what I think or give you some conjecture or some subjective point of view. I'm going to show you with the numbers what is actually happening. Our police, white police hunting down black guys and just shooting them like it's, like they're on a safari. No, it's just not happening. Matter of fact, the more whites die. I mean, that kind of data maybe isn't as titillating, maybe to sell a 30-second spot, on TikTok or whatever, but it's true. And if we don't have truth, a presuppositional, immutable truth by which we can all use so that if we are confused or upset or feel disoriented, we get to find true north, and then at least we all don't get to blame a race or an ethnicity for not liking the outcome. Whatever is true, I'm supposed to, as an adult, say, okay, then I have to adjust to that. We always talk about whenever something happens, especially where there's a racial element, we need to have a national conversation on race. And I always say to people, we can't. because you're not allowed to have an actual conversation, because if you do, it's going to mean I'm going to be ignorant of some things about your culture, and if I talk about that, suddenly I'm insensitive, or I'm being racist, or it's like, dude, if I can't even be ignorant and try to dig around and see if we can find some information so I can be more informed and balanced, then I can't have a conversation. And if I can't have a conversation, we're never getting anywhere, because there's no moving forward without constant information to combine and find, and hopefully a result that is deeper than it was when we started. So how do we take a culture, let's say, we talk about Black culture, whatever that is. Well, shouldn't it be sort of American culture, and they just happen to be Black, and it's American culture, and he happens to be white, and he happens to be Hispanic? Because there's hillbillies and rednecks, right? So they're white and they're Americans, but they have a very particular upbringing, perhaps poor, so they don't have a lot of funds, they don't have a lot of means to get anywhere in life or so forth. And so that tends to bring a different type of attitude in the way you see the world. It's easy to become a victim when you don't have what everybody else has, or at least to see yourself with that. It makes it easier than having to fix it. But how do we make assessments of hip hop or some things that are clearly not helpful to young Black men, for especially because they're the ones that are going to prison, they're the ones getting shot, and not make it seem like we're trying to zero in on one group, like you Black guys are all responsible for where you're going sideways. Well, we all are, I don't know how you can make it so simplistic to draw one line that everybody has to try to march upon when you have people from diverse histories and families and so forth. I don't even know how you sequence it into what you would call a culture. I mean, how is that even a feasible exercise?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that the answer, there are a couple questions there. The answer to the first question of how do you talk about race is you just talk normally and honestly to the 99% majority of people. Like, I used to be a semi-professional debater. Like, I've debated everyone from Jared Taylor to, I don't know if I'd call this an unfriendly debate, but Obsidian on the Obsidian show, Black performance guy. I don't know if I'd call it a debate, but I mean, like, just going back and forth and really exchanging ideas with people. And when you debate, you don't necessarily debate to convince your opponent. You debate to convince the 98% of the audience that hasn't yet been convinced by either one of you guys. So, I mean, when you're talking about race, I think you're talking to the huge majority of people out there. Again, only 8% of people are on Twitter. You're talking in an integrated men's barbershop with a lot of veterans in it. You're talking in church. You're talking in a bar. And you're saying things that are just normal that people are going to get to respond to normally. When I worked on not really a trading, but it's a big sales floor, very high dollar, called Marcus Evans. This was the US headquarters for this British company that focused on closing these big corp CEO meetup and, security business deals. What we called this professional aggression, PA. But the idea was you were never rude, you were never arrogant, but you would just call people and be confident and say, well, this is what I think. I'm a mid-level executive from this company. I'm going to pitch you about a six-figure package. Give me 5 minutes. I'm a serious guy. You can say yes, you can say no. And everyone would just listen. And then at the end, they would say, well, I agree with what you said here, and I disagree with what you said here. And that's how I still talk to this day. So that's how you discuss race. You just confidently say, well, this is what I think. I'm a white guy. I'm a Southerner. I'm not a racist. Now, what do you think? And you probably in the end would agree with some things about both hip hop and like heavy metal and outlaw country music. Like that stuff's trash for kids under 16. Okay, I'm gonna take those away from my boy. All right. That's how people talk in reality. Now there obviously are people that are going to try to censor those conversations. I guess just don't let them. I actually leave a lot of this stuff off of social media. Like I'm obviously pretty good on social, but I censor myself about 30-40% just because there are panicked mobs of people that will take anything and run with it. But a lot of that's not reality. Like a book, no one's going to excerpt more than a page of your book and put it on socials. That's one way to communicate. A podcast, these are long form dialogues, tens of thousands of views. So that's how I mostly do it. And I agree with you, by the way. A lot of people, when they say I want to have a real conversation on race, they don't mean a real conversation about race. They would talk about the white privilege that actually exists, most whites don't have. It's hereditary inheritance of wealth. So every now and then you'll meet someone who actually just genuinely is rich. Like their ancestors beat the Indians. And that's almost always a white guy. I mean, it's almost always like an English or French white guy. It's not, they're never going to be Black. They're never going to be Lithuanian. And you can say, okay, that person has this type of privilege. We need to talk about it. What are tax brackets? What should they look like in this country? You can also talk about Black crime. I mean, what are you talking with Hispanics about? I mean, migration is the obvious one. I love my Spanish people, but the Hispanic population has grown from 4% to 19% in the USA since 1980. We can talk about that pace of population change. Black people are on pace to be the third largest minority in the USA pretty soon. So whites and blacks have always fought. Do whites prefer Ecuadorians? Venezuelans? I mean, so those are real questions you can ask each other. Asian Americans, again, similar questions. So I think that's what an honest conversation about race would center on. Another honest conversation about race that we're not having is with the massive influx across the border of Hispanics and Asians, and also, to be fair, Black West Africans. We're obviously getting a lot of spies. So I don't see I mean, espionage has to be part of the discussion of some of this. Like, if you look at the pictures of a lot of these Chinese and West African males, I mean, they're standing at parade rest. I saw it. I'm not making this up at all. I guarantee this. One guy was wearing a polo shirt that said Nigerian intelligence on it. Now, that could be a joke. He could have bought that in a store. It could have been funny. But I mean, it could also just be, I'm making fun of this because there's no protection at this border. And I'm just going to come in and say that I'm somebody else. So all of those things are part of an honest discussion on migration and other racial issues. That's not what liberals want to talk about. So I've given some advice on how to have the conversation, but that's what the conversation is: crime, privilege, migration, interracial marriage. And I think most people are ready to have that conversation. I just don't think that the people that are shrieking about how whites need to listen to them want to have it.
Well, and what's interesting too is that people always tend to remove themselves from the same scrutiny they place on other people. When I hear of a progressive leftist, and I remember listening to Dennis Prager, and one of the things he always was pretty adamant about was, differentiating between liberal and leftist, because liberals, at least classic liberals, I once interviewed Alan Dershowitz for a documentary I was involved with, and people along that line, even Bill Maher, who's now, sort of using actual classic liberalism to be able to push back against some of this wokey stuff. But it's an interesting revelation that what used to be the pejorative from a conservative is you're a liberal was actually something I longed for now, because you would allow me to disagree with you, and we could say, here's my idea, here's your idea, they're diametrically opposed. Let's let the people decide. That was a healthy culture. But the left, of course, which, because of its Marxism, has no room for anybody at the table but them. But they're also, though, I find, always using sort of this very specific word leverage to try to diminish you or to tarnish you. This is all a power grab. Who the heck doesn't want a power grab? If you're trying to get your point of view to be sustained and to drive the next generation, you want power. I mean, that's kind of how it works. If a group of people came into another group of people and conquered them, we could say it's sad, and perhaps horrible atrocities took place. Nobody who is moral would consider that appropriate. We don't want that. But it's the history of humanity. Somebody conquers somebody who conquers somebody who conquers somebody. And only in the West did we have this idea that we had a particular perimeter, the Judeo-Christian ethic, that you can't suddenly have a slave. You can't suddenly eat them. You can't suddenly rape the women. You can't suddenly treat your enemy in a demoralizing and evil way, even though they're your enemy. This was revolutionary because we were given human rights to somebody, because nobody had ever thought that humans deserve rights. If I am stronger than you, I win, and I decide for you who you are and what you get. So, what I loved about the book, and again, I wish I would, I normally, like I said, I won't even interview a guy till I read the book, because I really want to talk about that. But I'm going to let you kind of help us understand it anyways, because chapters are really interesting. I want to bring them up here so I can read them. But it's called Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. So shall I presume, let's start there, does that mean you're a conservative? Because you said it's lies my liberal teacher taught me. So does that mean you're coming from that particular presuppositional worldview?
I'm fairly conservative. I'm on at least the center right. And what I mean by that is that I think, excuse the language, but shit has to work. So, I mean, I would describe myself as a moderately aggressive male businessman. I was pretty successful in that world. Now I'm a teacher. I've been a coach before. I'm a teacher in a collegiate environment where you have a lot of former inner city, a lot of Appalachian students. So there's a bit of strictness that sometimes comes into that. I still invest, I still consult. So, I mean, all those perspectives come into play. Like when I'm talking about, like, my crime policy is basically lock them up or kill them. If you're talking about something other than like shoplifting, it's basically just what we've always done historically. My immigration policy is just put a wall on the border, put some guys on it with guns. don't massacre anybody, but it's the immigration policy we've always had. I mean, so those are conservative policies. My policy on roads is build them, wars is win them, to quote Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's just, so those are my takes. When it comes to the sort of boys kissing social issues, now I think the majority of men are somewhat grossed out by boys kissing, and it's a bit silly to deny that and pretend that, like, as Joe Biden recently did. Now, Joe Biden was a fist fighting Irishman from 1950 Scranton, if you listen to his stories about corn pop and so on. So to listen to him saying, well, you know, my dad, an old Catholic man, saw two men making out down by the bus station, and he turned to his buddy who was black and he said, well, that's just love. No, that didn't happen. An Irish guy and a black guy in Pennsylvania in 1950 did not say that crap. That didn't happen. Like,
if they were even hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be dueling bars across the street. There'd be a fist fight once a week by prearrangement. But I mean, like, no, but the whole idea, like, that's complete crap. But I don't really care about that stuff. I mean, if you want your partner to be a virgin at marriage or something, that's fine for you. It may very well be a good idea. But I don't think that's the goal of the state. That's something that should be regulated. But in terms of crime, immigration, welfare policy, fatherhood, in the sense that you have to take care of your kids, child support system, but also once you enter into that arrangement, your partner can't abort the child in the 7th month, all that stuff. I have very traditional views because we have traditional systems that have worked since Rome to do all of those things. I mean, we have the Greek model, the Roman model, the early Christian model, the late Christian model, the English model. So I mean, that's what I'm conservative on. And I think a last comment, one of the things about that was that I knew this as a fairly young guy. I mean, I was a decent high school student. I went to Catholic school for a while. I was in the honors program. And so I'd read some of this. And I was a kid in Chicago and then later in East Aurora. So I'm sitting there with like my white tee on, my gold cross, and my skateboard. And I'm watching this stuff just not work. Like, I'm on the bus trying to read, and there are couples are making out in the back. They're homeless guys wandering around. I have no legs, like the movie Kids. People are selling single pencils and loose cigarettes, and it's just sort of, you could just stop all of this very easily. Any good leader could. So you start to ask the question of, why hasn't someone done it? And later I became aware of why people hadn't done it. I mean, I became aware of the 1960s movements, the surge in crime that occurred during the 70s and the 80s that I was seeing the tail end of as a 90s kid, the sexual revolution and the role that played in the rave scene that I participated in. A lot of life at this point in Chicago and New York was not dissimilar from, that one movie Kids that's referenced in rap songs. And that wasn't entirely my life. Like I said, I was kind of nerdy. I was a varsity athlete, but it was definitely around. People were definitely aware of it. The homeless were definitely there. Prostitutes were definitely walking around. There was a street in Aurora called LaSalle that was notorious for that. And you just realized that anyone could make it stop. And that was one of the things that I took into adulthood, like competent, the image in my mind was male leaders should just do that so that there weren't girls walking home from Catholic school past hookers and, guys sleeping in wine boxes and that sort of thing.
There isn't a fix. I mean, we're not talking about something that just got invented in the US. This is human history. There's the poor guy sitting by the, by the well begging. And then we decide, how do we treat people that obviously are going to be in different stages of value and different stages of what they might be able to eat or to work? Because here's the thing, and maybe this kind of might lead to your book a little bit, is that there is no equity on earth. It doesn't, life doesn't work like that. It never has. And by the way, it shouldn't. You shouldn't be rewarded for not working as hard as the guy next to you. That should be kind of an obvious sense of meritocracy, as they say, because, if I'm going to 4 years of college and then 4 years of pre-med and then going 4 years to study, and 30 years later, whatever, I can do heart surgery. Yeah, I should get paid for that because I invested years of my life. There must be an agenda here, because this is what I hear from a lot of people, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Corona had one, to me, because I didn't play the game from day one. I didn't do the masks. I wouldn't do the vax. I wouldn't do any of it. I said, this is unconstitutional. Something is wrong. It did have one redeeming quality. It revealed everything. Suddenly you're like, oh my God, what is going on this earth? When the masks came on, the masks came off. we started seeing that this world is much more complex, devious. There's more people running the levers. Who knows how long, if we've even had a republic, that we could actually vote? We don't really know anymore. And that is really, I think, again, back to even what your book is dealing with and your taboo and everything that you try to focus on is what is true so we can get somewhere. How do we even start that conversation? Somebody has something at stake. They're trying to control. They're trying to keep people ignorant so that they can control them by fear or by simply negligence or by lack of desire to go to seek these things out. They don't care. Just feed me, keep me safe. And those cowards are killing the West and the freedom. So what is your thoughts on just what's going on? Like what is the presupposition? What is the philosophy that is manning all this and making people that seem to be so, it's like they're in a cult. It's a religion because it makes no sense what people are voting for or allowing to take place or saying a girl's a boy or you're a cat. Something, I've never seen anything like this in human history. Is there a precedent for this?
Well, there's a series of good questions there. So, I mean, first of all, like when you said, going back a little bit, when you were talking about, in Chicago or the city you grew up in, there are always going to be problems. Yeah, that's true. But I think the question is whether the left or the right or the far left or the far right does a better job of them. Now, the far right would probably just kill everyone responsible for the problems, but that has its own issues. People get scared. Of the remaining three options, I'd say the right does the best job. So it's correct to say the poor will always be with us. Jesus said that. Caesar said that. When those two agree on something, it's probably correct. I think Buddha said it too. It doesn't mean anything, not to insult any of those great men. It's just, yes, there will always be some poor people. But for example, what we used to do with homeless vagrants, what we're now calling like the unhoused citizens or something, was put them in institutions. The idea was if you were in the workhouse, and these weren't the stereotype that we have every time an institution ends. For example, that traditional marriage through the 1950s was housewives were being beaten or sexually violated every day and they were horribly depressed. We've been polling the mental health of people for about 100 years. They were actually substantially happier than men and women today. The large majority of men are not abusive rapists, even for people that are inclined to behave in that fashion. This was an era when everyone had guns and rat poison at home. Everyone had 4 or 5 brothers. The stereotype that's evolved after the institution change is just not real in 97 probably percent of cases. So similarly, I mean, the institutions, if you went to the workhouse, there was a certain amount of money per day that was placed in your account. And at a certain point, you would have the money to get out and get either an SRO, a single room occupancy, if you wanted to leave early, or an apartment, or maybe a house. You would work, and then you would be able to live somewhere other than the street. And if you were unsuited for that, you were an extreme alcoholic, tremors, or you were a drug user, and you wanted someone to monitor you, you could remain. You could tutor other people, as I understand the system. But in the 1980s, the Democrats who thought this was sort of nurse Ratched, one flew over the cuckoo's nest abuse, and the Republicans who just don't like paying for stuff, honestly, that's kind of our weakness. Like, what the hell with it? Closed these institutions. And that's when you started seeing people wandering the streets, talking to themselves and you and ghosts that aren't there. So, I mean, I think that moderate right solution of like just put them in institutions of some kind and make them work, that actually works quite well. There are logical human solutions that have worked for all of time. You can view them as a little cruel, but the other option is people living under bridges in tents, getting set on fire by teen gangs for fun. That's what we have now. We have like sexually abused, crazy people outside. Similarly with crime, where the solution is like the cops knock you over the head and throw you in the paddy wagon. I mean, following proper police protocol, of course, that works pretty well. Like in the 1960s, when we became worried about the police pursuing blacks and white ethnics and poor people and everybody else, is it fair? We became obsessed about these 10% differences and the treatment of different groups. We passed, when the Supreme Court went through first, I believe Escobedo came first, actually, then Miranda, rights for criminals. This all followed. You're assigned a public defender, then fruit of the poison tree. I'm actually a lawyer by background, technically speaking. So, I mean, if the constable blunders arresting someone, if there's a mistake on the warrant, the criminal goes free. All of this happened within about a 15-year period. And there's a point to what I'm saying here, which is that criminals began to be released during the 1960s and 70s social experiment, which we call the 60s en bloc, in record numbers. And that obviously impacted the crime rate to a record extent. So most people don't know this, but between 1963 and 1993, those are the years I usually use, crime increased about 500%. Every time I've broken it out, black crime increased about 800%. So if you just go to Disaster Center or any other website that puts together all the compiled crime rate data, I mean, you'll see that murders went from about 8,000 to 24,530. And population size grew maybe 30%, something like that. So you're just seeing this massive surge in crime because we stopped effectively policing.
Yeah.
And over the past 20 years, we've seen that 2 or 3 more times, the Floyd effect, the Ferguson effect. So I guess what I'm saying is that we do actually have these effective center-right solutions that work to keep society functional. And every time we abandon them, every time we say, well, why don't we just let people live outside in tent camps and use drugs, you see absolutely predictable, disastrous effects that again go back hundreds of years to the lotus eaters and the opium smokers. And every society that's tried this is seeing the same effect. So I guess that's my point. Now, you wanted to kind of swing from that discussion of savage reality into the book.
Yes.
And I think that actually works pretty well because the book is sort of about savage reality. So the book's called 10 Lies or Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, and available at Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. But the basis of the book is that in the West, a lot of students are told this 2-part lie. Like, one is that the West was the worst culture that ever existed. And a subtext of that is that probably you've been told the opposite. Well, I guess you could actually separate these. One, the West is the worst culture that ever existed. We killed the Indians and we held slaves and we dropped big bombs on innocent people of color. Women were oppressed, so on down the line. The second, which I think is more insidious, is that we don't tell people this. We're lying to you. Everyone tells you how great society was. Only when you become woke, like think about that phrase, when you become awake, when you become enlightened, do you see how evil your own parents and the leaders of your own society were. So like I always mention that college textbooks have these little sidebars. Like there's a tempting red arrow pointing north that says like, you didn't know a lot about feminism, did you? Let me tell you, turn the page. I think this is all basically bullshit. Like the Western society did not historically do anything that other societies did not do, except for a few good things like emancipation in the New World. Like prior to, and this is the theme of the book, I think, like whether or not ultimate morals exist at all, and unless you're a traditional Judeo-Christian believer, I find it difficult to believe you think they do. I mean, it's very difficult to argue the categorical imperative or something like that. We're not going to get into philosophy right now, unless you really want to. But I mean, whether or not ultimate morals exist throughout all of history, virtually no one has believed the things that we believe right now.
You're right.
The general moral code historically was closer to what you might think of as the Viking or Iroquois 9 noble virtues: bravery, aggression, that sort of thing. So you were expected to be brave and honorable and reasonably good to those close to you, but you weren't expected to feel anything at all toward enemies or prey animals, rivals from another society. And there were some in-between categories like business clients. But the end result of all this was that slavery, conquest, rape in wartime, which obviously I have some issues with, I assume you do, but like all that stuff, that was universal until 60 years ago. The final Geneva Conventions, which prohibit the torture of, honorably fighting prisoners of war, were signed in 1954. The right of conquest itself, which says that if you win a mutually declared war with another country, you can't take all their land. That used to be the reason you fought. That was signed in 1946. That was repealed in 1946. Sorry, but the end of the right of conquest is generally traced to the defeat of Hitler's Nazis, the fall of Germany and the Japanese Empire. So prior to that point, the things that we are constantly beating ourselves with belts for, winning a war with a great nation of indigenous people like the Sioux, those things were happening on every single continent. Like the Romans went up to Gaul and beat the Gauls and made it France. What happened to the Gauls? Well, half of them stayed there as slave warriors under the Romans, and the other half were sold throughout the world. That's just what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, the Turks, the Ottomans conquered Eastern Europe. So a great many white Europeans are Muslims to this day in Albania, Moldova, Bosnia, Serbia, so on down the line. Why did the Turks conquer Europe? Well, because they wanted to. They were brown Muslims. They were fought about equally with the white Europeans. They didn't much like them. So they went up there and took their land. I mean, the great vineyards in that region of the world. So I guess the point is the guilt storyline is completely unfounded. But secondarily, the story that no one tells Westerners or whites or men or whatever that we should feel guilty is complete nonsense. The books that I'm using as sources for this book are the major high school textbooks used in the country. So what I actually find is that since maybe 1940, the primary narrative in the United States has been that we are a bad country. The people presenting this narrative lie about it. They say they're rebels, they say they're edgy, but you can go back through James Lowen, who wrote Lies My Teacher Told Me, that's 1995. You can go back through Vine Deloria, Custer Died for Our Sins, that's 1968. You can go back through Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, I think it's a year before that. You can go back through all of these books, and this has been very constant outside of some mostly white schools in the South for decades. And so I look at whether the stories that are being told now, like Native Americans were peaceful, are any more real than the stories that were told in the past. And the answer is no. Of course, Native Americans weren't peaceful. They fought us, bravely and well for 400 years, killed millions. I mean, no one was peaceful. We weren't peaceful either. They captured black warriors, the white warriors, the Scots-Irish slaves, and the shit. No one was peaceful. You couldn't be peaceful. You'd be eaten by wolves. So that attempting to apply the nicer moral standards of today to like a Scotsman with a knife in his teeth doesn't make any sense.
No. And oikophobia is this odd concept where people begin to hate their own nation. This is kind of what you're talking about, is even in our schools and so forth, this became part of the curriculum. James Lindsay talked about in the Marxification of Education about the Paulo Freire's concept about that teachers should be on the same level as the students, that you both learn from each other, there's no sort of hierarchy. And basically that his premise was, you're not creating students and educating them, you're creating activists. That's kind of your job, is to make everything about how you can apply this information into an activism so you can change things into a Marxist utopia. Why people continue to go back to that ridiculously failed evil idea, I don't understand. But I love how your book, I mean, just to give people just an idea of the chapters, because they need to be more well informed. I mean, the first one is about how true slavery was virtually unique to American West. Clearly, obviously, slavery has been around forever. The word slave comes from Slav, which I think were white people. The Red Scare was a moral panic that caught no commies. The Native Americans were peaceful people who spent all days dancing. Yeah, you mean like the Comanches that would catch the people and cut the bottoms of their feet off and then make them dance while they shot arrows at them? Yeah, no, they were good people, weren't they? Sexual revolution was good for women. Vietnam was unpopular and pointless. Founders counted slaves as 3/5 of a person. That's inaccurate. That was the way they were trying to count a census. So they had to give them a sense of where they fit. Obviously, I'm sure that's what you're talking about. Only victims of lynching were blacks. There were the white people who were lynched all over the place. European colonialism was a terrible thing. Let's talk about colonialism. I mean, how much good it has done to societies right now, that had India not had colonialism, it'd be a third world. I mean, they wouldn't be close to what they've become. Again, that doesn't mean that brutality or evil or racism, if we want to use that, didn't become part of that DNA. I'm sure that's true, because humans are involved and they're sinners. But talk about, if you could, just to give people a quick synopsis on what your chapters are illuminating, is things that we were taught was the ultimate evil. Dropping the bomb in Hiroshima. Is that a good thing to do, or was that just as evil as it gets? You talk about that. I didn't read it again, so give me a quick thumbnail sketch on that. Why should we be allowed to drop nuclear bombs?
Colonialism, I think, has a mixed but mostly good record. I don't see why I would shy away from my own conclusions. India actually is a complex case, and there are other complex cases, Nigerian substates and so on, because India was somewhat civilized and somewhat developed. It was very civilized. But I mean, India was one of the wealthier areas of the world before the British got there, but it also progressed upward as the British were there. The issue with India, so there are two things with colonialism. One, people like Bruce Gilley have pointed out that the basic argument against colonialism is just Marxist nonsense. So the argument is just that sort of external conquest is always bad and will always make a place worse. And Gilley has pointed out that if you're conquered externally by a more advanced people, they're probably going to make your society better. even if you dislike each other, the Chinese or the Mongols or the Brits or whoever, when they come into your country, the French are going to bring things like paved roads that you didn't have before if you're Kazakhstan, and that's going to improve the standard of living in the Kazakh marches. And I mean, I'm mentioning 4 countries that have actually fought in that particular region in that case, as I understand. But I mean, India somewhat developed. I mean, there were states like Mysore that had city-state level capacities. The British did bring in cross-national railroads. The British did bring in modern ports. Some modern scholars try to attribute famines to them. I don't trust anything Marxists say. I don't think that's true. I'd have to look at every famine, but I mean, I will note India had the same rate of famines before they came in. But India, mixed to successful would be my offhand comment there. But in a lot of cases, I look at Africa extensively in this book, for example. And in much of Africa, what you had was not, there's a tendency on the part of these woke people to treat primitive warriors as kind of utopian. So, like the title of that chapter, all Indians did was sit around dancing and making love. Like, no, these societies were devoted entirely to war very often. Like, you would go take the other tribe's cattle, and then you double your wealth. You could eat an entire herd of cattle, and then you had another herd of cattle to take you through tough times. Right? I mean, that was the greatest event of a 10-year cycle if you really won a war. So, I mean, in much of Black Africa, you had large, expanding civilized empires like the Sokoto Caliphate, which were often as developed as the whites or 100 or so years behind, but far crueler. They were practicing a very brutal form of Islam or something like that. Then you had kind of tribal kings that were kind of doing their best, low medieval level of technology. And then you had just like naked people living in the jungle to some extent. That's a rude way to put it, but an accurate one. And if you were in the latter 2 of those groups, this was often a very bad, very dangerous environment. It's hard to plant crops when the tree line could just sprout naked men at any time waving weapons. When the British came into places like the Oyo region of Nigeria, there are these passages in the book that are almost touching where people are like, they were killers too, but at least they brought peace. The traders came down from the hills again, and people stopped raiding for girls to take his wives, and there was a period of 20 years with no war. So the idea that colonialism would always be bad because it's external is false. Often you had a more advanced society beating a less advanced society and bringing in the advantages of the more advanced society. So like the great Nigerian writer Chiuna Akabe has pointed out, like we already had good food, we already had good houses, we know how to build and all that, but we didn't have schools. We didn't have a concept of organized grade-based schools as opposed to a wise man sitting on a bench. We didn't have hospitals as opposed to 2 good doctors per village. We didn't have the electricity to power those hospitals. We didn't know how to make lakes in cities that weren't close to the ocean. The British brought all this in. So those are the advantages of colonialism. And I think I discussed them pretty frankly. But another point that's rarely made, like even if you accept that external military conquest is always bad, in most cases that had already happened. So like India at the time the British got there wasn't ruled by like a Dravidian king who reigning from a great Hindu palace in Sambalpur, with a statue of Hanuman, the monkey god of war in front of it. The rulers of most of India were the Mughal Empire, who were brutal Muslim conquerors descended from the Mongols. So they were Asian looking Muslim guys who were the best spearmen in history. They almost beat the British. So to say that the British, when they came in, were evil for beating this other group of external conquerors makes no sense at all. Like you can say the Mongols were doing a pretty good job of running India and India was already rich. Okay. But that leaves aside the question of why the Mongols had more of a right to be there than the British did.
Right.
And usually when you ask a lib this, what they'll say is, well, those were not white Europeans. And it's supposed to be a defining argument, but you just respond by saying, well, were they Indians? Like, were they Southern brown-skinned Indian guys? And if the answer is no, then there's no point there at all.
Yeah.
It's just something people have gotten used to saying, white man bad. But I don't think white man bad. So I make a good number of points for colonialism. The nuclear bomb, by the way, and there's some against it. I think that's one of the more nuanced chapters. The nuclear bomb, that's just good. Like, if you assume that one human death is bad, as a leader, you have to actually make choices. You and I have both been leaders, although at far lower levels than, drop little boy. In that situation, the two options were dropping Fat Man and Little Boy, or an invasion of the core Japanese islands launched by Britain, the USA, Australia, and maybe Russia. And in that second scenario, 3 million people die. Japanese citizens, Americans, allies. People would be gutted by boarding pikes as they walked ashore. Japanese elite soldiers, people descended from the samurai would have met us in the surf. I mean, there's no question that saved millions of lives, hundreds of thousands at a minimum.
Well, and even in today's issue in Palestinian and Israel, is that people die because wars are started, and it's tragic and it's horrible. But there's always this weird desire to end wars and to find peace, but we want to do it without bloodshed, which it can't work that way, unfortunately.
Yes.
If you're going to have to keep somebody from attacking and destroying you, you have to kill them because they're going to kill you. This is simply the way it works. One of the things that you said about whiteness doesn't exist. There's no such thing as whiteness. My white skin has never built a business. My white skin has never harmed a human being. That is simply the outer visage of what people see when I'm walking around. What does change are ideas. Ideas are what make people, philosophies, concepts, ideologies. That's what does things, because it draws people to take volition, to choose to act on a certain impulse, which means somebody has something at stake. There's some agenda. There's something that we're trying to accomplish. So what exactly do you think really is whiteness? That's the easy terms to just separate people that look like me and become a racist and give yourself permission. But the truth is, are we talking about Judeo-Christian ethics? Are we talking about modernism? Are we talking about, what philosophy? Are we talking about capitalism? Are we talking about free market enterprise? In other words, what is the actual motivating force that has accomplished the things that people that happen to be European, so yeah, they're white, what is actually undergirding this thing that these Marxists clearly hate and don't want to succeed and want to destroy? What is the real motivating force that allows people of European descent to have accomplished so much? What is that?
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about is basically Western culture. I mean, the idea, the combination, it's just Athens and Jerusalem, right? Like the combination of rationality with religious checks on it. I mean, I have great respect for my white countrymen, but I don't actually think that whites have accomplished staggeringly more than the other great human races. I mean, I guess until recent. Well, white people between 1492 and today have probably had the greatest run of the human racial groups. And you've got to give the Europeans props for that. I mean, so it went to the moon and all that. So well done, But I mean, I think that like prior to that, if you were to look at, and everyone that does this, I've seen people from Charles Murray, who I like a lot, to I think it's Chang Wutan, the Chinese guy who responded. I've seen people try to claim their group is responsible for most human inventions. And it gets into this, like, are you citing books written in your language that list the inventors? Like the Chinese will cite 14 inventors of gunpowder and all that. I would say if you did an honest analysis and you looked at who did the most, what country invented the greatest percentage of the inventions during each century, it would be extremely diverse. Like you'd start in the beginning and it would be Egypt, Israel, Sumeria, countries that don't even exist anymore, Egypt again, Babylon. And these are all, I don't even know what you call these people, dark skin, black skin, Caucasians. I mean, these are groups that are no longer with us to some extent. But as you went forward, you Greece, Rome, but then, I mean, Persia, you'd move away from the whites again, Thailand, China. So, I mean, I don't think that historically there's been a master race. There's certainly never been a race of masters. Even the great African societies, and I say even only because it's hard to get around the Sahara Desert, but I mean, Ethiopia, some which fought Rome about evenly, which trained the Hannibal's elephant riders. Even Carthage, I mean, they were mostly white, but not entirely. Mansa Musa's Mali, Timbuktu was the magic place people sailed in the old nautical songs. I mean, they were quite competitive globally. So white people in about 1500 had started to break out of Europe. They'd started to perform differently from others. And I think, again, that's because that combination of religion and science that developed in that competitive region. I don't think that's a genetic thing. If anything, Asians and West Africans have a slight IQ edge probably on most whites. If we're going to assume that's genetic, which I don't actually. Um, but yeah, I mean, so whiteness is when people use that label, like white culture, they mean Athens and Jerusalem.
Yes.
Now, when people in just day-to-day life say whiteness, like if I were to say that guy's white, if I were picking a basketball team, the white guy sitting by the, Concordia College by the tree, what I would mean is someone of European Caucasian descent.
Yeah.
And I will note that like race does exist. And sorry, last thing, but like if you go to 23andMe, you can give them a blood test and they will tell you exactly your race. Like for me, they would say something along the lines of 40% Bantu Black, 40% Celtic, 20% Plains Indian. It wouldn't even be black. It would be very specific. The last is kind of speculative in the family, but it would be very broken down. Um, so a white person is one of the people that fall in the Euro-Caucasian group. There's also West Asian Caucasian, that would be Levantines, Arabs. There's Black Bantu. I think there's Black Nilotic, which would probably be Ethiopians and so on. They have more politically correct ways of putting this. We all kind of know what it is. So East Asian. And in that sense, I mean, a white would just be a Euro-Caucasian. But when people say whiteness, when they're speaking as woke people, they mean something else. That's why
Yes.
they can say that a Japanese or a Nigerian is adjacent to whiteness. They mean these were people from the other great historical cultures that are also corrupted by the sin of thinking hierarchically or abusing women or something like that. So I think that's the answer.
As a Christ follower, I mean, I have to see things through the lens of what I believe is all people are made in God's image. So we are, in fact, equal.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're all the same smart, doesn't mean we all work the same discipline, but we have the potential and we're all equal in regards to we're humans. And it's funny because so much of this idea of wanting us to be sort of equity and everybody gets the same thing, and that's what they presume to act like they want to live for. And yet, they're the ones that talk about, I don't know, use up terms like cultural appropriation, which we used to call sharing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad that
Trade.
you invented an arrow. I think I'll use that. By the way, have you seen these new blankets we're making out of that we're actually like? Yeah, that's what we came up with. What do you got going over here? I mean, in some odd way, when people were more tribal and more fearful and more having to defend their lives at every step, there was this appreciation of everybody's culture, and we didn't look at it like the black people gave me something. There's this new invention that is helpful. I'm going to use this. It's just pragmatic. This is all good things that as humans we used to do together and think there was some value to it, and we didn't suddenly label it and then covet it and then act like somebody's evil, and the same people that are telling me I'm wrong for being white, lording over them because I'm stealing their culture. I said, well, then quit speaking to me in English. That's mine. Quit using my language. Go find a new language because you don't get mine. And quit using your phone. That's mine. I mean, if we're going to play stupid, that's how you'd play. Is you act as though, and yet the history of humanity is every culture had a piece of the puzzle that made it all come together so we could end up where we are today with this type of incredible scientific breakthroughs that we've come through because so many generations of people were trying to find out, why are we here? What's the purpose of all this? What is going on? Well, your book is something that I want all my people to buy and to read. It is Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. I gave you some of the topics because they're just interesting. Also, by the way, since I read this a while ago, grab this too, Taboo. I like it because he talks about things you're not supposed to be able to talk about. You've got to be able to speak truth. The conservatives, the Christians, we're the last truth tellers on earth. Somebody has to remember who we are, where we're going, where we came from, what is true, a foundation. It's important that people like you, Wilfred Reilly, are out there writing books and teaching and hopefully keeping alive the absolute immutable truth of what is necessary to educate, but also hopefully to fight off this wokeism that's killing us. Folks, remember, if they ever tell you you're politically incorrect, always say thank you for the compliment. The last thing you want to be is being involved with cultural Marxism. Folks, be free, speak unapologetically. And I'm just a comic, but I care about freedom and certainly free speech. That's how I make my livelihood. And remember, I'm just doing what I do, just putting the woke back to sleep. See you next Monday.